A heated parking lot dispute turns ugly when a racist couple confronts a black woman, demanding she give up her spot. As tensions rise, the woman refuses to back down, staying calm despite their hostility. When the confrontation escalates and Karen shoves her, she thinks she's won, until a police officer steps in, having witnessed everything. In an instant, the power shifts. Facing consequences, Karen is forced into a public apology. Her humiliation caught on camera as bystanders cheer for justice. In the end, karma strikes back, proving that entitlement and racism never win. The parking lot hummed with the usual afternoon chaos: shoppers pushing carts, cars pulling in and out, and the distant murmur of conversations. But amid the routine, movement, a storm was brewing. A middle-aged white woman in a denim jacket, her face twisted with anger, stood inches away from a young black woman in a gray t-shirt, jabbing a finger toward her face with hostility. Her voice cut through the air, sharp and filled with entitlement. "You people always think you can take what isn't yours," she snapped. Aaliyah, the young woman on the receiving end of the aggression, didn't flinch. She stood her ground, her expression unreadable. Her hands remained relaxed at her sides, her posture firm. The hostility radiating from the woman in front of her was nothing new, but she refused to shrink under it. "I'm not going anywhere," she said evenly. Nearby, a few bystanders paused, their casual chatter fading as they sensed the confrontation escalating. Some reached for their phones, discreetly hitting record as the tension thickened. Others exchanged knowing glances, already predicting how this would unfold. The woman's husband stood just behind her, arms crossed like a spectator confident in the outcome. His smirk suggested he believed they were in control, that their words alone were enough to force Aaliyah into submission. But just when they thought they had won, everything changed in an instant. The shopping center parking lot was packed with cars, the usual weekend rush bringing waves of shoppers in and out. The air carried the sounds of distant honking, the squeak of shopping carts, and muffled conversations. Above, a layer of gray clouds stretched across the sky, casting a dull shadow over the asphalt. It wasn't storming, but the air felt heavy, charged, like something was about to happen. Aaliyah Brooks had just pulled into a parking space near the entrance, cutting the engine as she reached for her bag. She was in no rush. Dressed in a simple gray t-shirt and jeans, her curly natural hair framed her face, highlighting the quiet confidence she carried in her posture. At 24, she had long since learned how to handle herself in uncomfortable situations, how to pick her battles. But today, that choice was about to be taken from her. As soon as she opened her door, she heard the sharp clip of approaching footsteps. "Excuse me." Aaliyah turned just in time to see a middle-aged white woman storming toward her, her short blonde hair bouncing with each step. Her denim jacket was stiff at the shoulders, her expression even stiffer. Behind her, a man in a plaid shirt followed at a slower pace, arms crossed, his mouth set in a hard line. Aaliyah let out a slow breath, already sensing where this was going. "You just took our parking spot." The woman's voice was sharp, cutting through the background. Noise of the lot. Aaliyah glanced at the empty lanes. There were plenty of spots available, just a few feet away. She looked back at the woman, Karen, as she immediately pegged her to be, and raised an eyebrow. "I didn't see a blinker," Aaliyah said calmly, shutting her door and slinging her bag over her shoulder. Karen let out an incredulous laugh, shaking her head like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "We were waiting. You must have seen us." Aaliyah sighed, adjusting the strap of her bag. I didn't, and I got here first. From behind Karen, Tom finally spoke. His voice was quieter, but no less condescending. Typical, he muttered. Aaliyah's eyes flicked toward him, her expression unreadable. The weight behind that one word wasn't lost on her. She had seen this scenario play out before, and she knew exactly what they thought of her before she had even spoken a word. Karen stepped closer, pointing toward the car. "You need to move it," she demanded. "This was our spot." Aaliyah didn't budge. "No, it wasn't," she replied evenly. A subtle tension rippled through the parking lot. A few bystanders had begun to slow their steps, lingering nearby, pretending to busy themselves with their bags and phones. But they were listening, watching. One young woman in a hoodie pulled out her phone, discreetly tapping the record button. Karen wasn't just angry, she was seething now. Her face flushed red, her breath coming faster. Tom said nothing more, but his presence, standing stiffly behind her, made it clear that he supported every word she spewed. Aaliyah held her ground, unshaken. She had no intention of moving her car, but deep down she knew this wasn't really about a parking spot. It never was. And judging by the way Karen's hands clenched into fists, this was far from over. Karen took a step closer, planting herself directly in Aaliyah's path. Her jaw was tight, her eyes narrowed with the kind of certainty that came from a lifetime of believing she was always right. She pointed toward the car, her finger trembling slightly with frustration. "Excuse me, we were waiting for this spot," she snapped. Aaliyah let out a slow breath, raising an eyebrow as she shifted her weight onto one leg. The aggression in Karen's stance was unnecessary, but Aaliyah had seen this before. This wasn't about a parking spot. "I didn't see your blinker," she said, her tone calm but firm. "And I got here first." Tom, who had been standing just behind his wife, let out a scoff and shook his head. His arms crossed over his chest as he muttered under his breath. Typical. The word hung in the air like a slow-burning fuse. Aaliyah's expression didn't change, but inside, she knew exactly where this was headed. She had been through this dance before. The microaggressions, the coded language, the unspoken belief that she wasn't supposed to be here. Karen's lips curled in disgust as her voice rose, her entitlement shifting into full-blown hostility. "You people always take what doesn't belong to you." A hush fell over the parking lot. A few shoppers slowed their steps, pretending to rummage through their bags or check their phones, but their eyes stayed locked on the confrontation. One young woman in a hoodie, standing a few feet away, pulled out her phone and discreetly hit record. Aaliyah remained still, unimpressed. She had learned long ago that reacting with anger only gave people like Karen exactly what they wanted. Instead, she folded her arms across her chest, tilting her head slightly. "And what exactly do you think I'm taking?" she asked, her voice as smooth as glass. Karen's face flushed, and for a moment she seemed at a loss for words. But then, as if realizing she was being challenged, she doubled down. "You stole our parking space. You saw us waiting. You just thought you could take it because—" She didn't finish the sentence. Maybe she realized she was being recorded, or maybe she simply didn't have the courage to say what she really meant. Either way, the implication hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Tom let out a low chuckle. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "No respect." Aaliyah exhaled sharply through her nose, biting back the urge to roll her eyes. This was getting ridiculous. There are plenty of other spaces, she said, gesturing toward the open spots just a few feet away. But you're not mad about the parking spot, are you? Karen's eyes flashed with something close to rage. Don't you dare try to turn this around. This is about respect. You need to move your car. I'm not moving, Aaliyah interrupted, her voice flat. Karen's breath hitched, as if the sheer act of defiance was too much to process. Her fists clenched at her sides. Tom stepped forward slightly, his presence looming just behind his wife, but Aaliyah held her ground. The confrontation was spiraling fast. The parking lot felt smaller now, the tension stretching taut like a rubber band about to snap. More shoppers had stopped to watch. The girl recording the scene zoomed in slightly, her phone steady in her hands. Karen's face twisted in frustration, her voice rising to a near shriek. You are so damn rude. You think you can just do whatever you want? That there are no consequences? Aaliyah met her gaze, unmoved. You tell me, she said quietly. For the first time, a flicker of hesitation passed through Karen's eyes. She must have felt it. The shift in the air, the weight of the stairs, the slow realization that this wasn't going the way she had expected. But she wasn't done. Not yet. Karen's face twisted with rage as she jabbed a finger toward Aaliyah, her voice rising to a near scream. Her presence, once merely aggressive, had now turned hostile, her movements erratic with frustration. Get back in your car and move it, she shrieked, her finger mere inches from Aaliyah's face. Aaliyah didn't flinch. She barely even blinked. Instead, she took a slow step back, giving Karen space she clearly didn't deserve, and tilted her head slightly. No, she said, her voice flat, unwavering. Karen's breath hitched. For a brief second, there was silence. The parking lot, once filled with casual conversations and the rustling of shopping bags, had come to a standstill. The growing crowd stood frozen, eyes locked on the confrontation. Phones were out now, cameras rolling, capturing every moment. Karen's fingers twitched at her sides. She wasn't used to being denied. She wasn't used to people standing their ground against her. And then, without warning, she lunged forward and shoved Aaliyah. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. A man near the back cursed under his breath. The girl recording let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh. Aaliyah barely moved. The force of the push wasn't enough to knock her down, just enough to make a statement, but instead of reacting, she simply stared at Karen, her expression unreadable. Her hands remained at her sides. Her breathing stayed even. She exhaled, slowly, then spoke. Did you just put your hands on me? Karen smirked, her chest rising and falling quickly as adrenaline coursed through her. She had done it. She had made her point. She had won. What are you gonna do? She sneered, eyes alight with triumph. And then a voice, deep and authoritative, boomed from behind. That's assault. The shift was instantaneous. Karen froze, her smugness evaporating in an instant. Tom's face drained of color as he turned slowly, his confidence crumbling, like a house of cards. Aaliyah, on the other hand, remained still. She didn't even need to turn around to know what had just happened. The officer had been watching the entire time. The officer stepped forward, his boots clicking against the asphalt as he closed the distance between himself and Karen. His uniform was crisp, his posture straight, and his expression unreadable. He didn't need to raise his voice to command the attention of everyone present. The murmurs of the onlookers quieted as all eyes fell on him. Ma'am, he said, his voice even and authoritative, you just assaulted her. That's a criminal offense. Karen's eyes widened slightly before she let out a nervous, breathy laugh. She turned to Tom as if expecting him to share in her disbelief, but he said nothing. His face was blank, his arms crossed tighter over his chest. Swallowing, Karen shook her head and scoffed. "Are you kidding?" she said, trying to keep her voice light, though there was an unmistakable edge of panic creeping in. "She's the one who stole our spot." The officer didn't blink. His expression didn't shift. He simply repeated himself, his voice just as steady. "And you put your hands on her." Karen opened her mouth, then closed it, her confidence faltering. She turned to Tom again, searching for some kind of escape, but this time, Tom had already begun inching backward, his fingers brushing against her arm. "Let's just go," he muttered under his breath, his voice low, tight with quiet urgency. Karen barely heard him. Her pulse pounded in her ears as the weight of the moment settled over her. The crowd wasn't just watching anymore. They were waiting. Phones were still out, cameras still rolling, capturing every second of her unraveling. There was no talking her way out of this. The officer turned to Aaliyah, who had yet to move, yet to react in any visible way. She had stood firm throughout, the entire ordeal, and now she regarded Karen with the same calmness she had carried from the start. "Would you like to press charges?" the officer asked, his voice softer, as if offering Aaliyah the power Karen had tried to strip from her. Karen's heart nearly stopped. The words hit like a slap to the face, colder than the overcast sky above them. "Wait, what?" she blurted, stepping forward before Tom grabbed her arm, pulling her back. Aaliyah tilted her head, her expression unreadable. For a long moment she said nothing, only studying Karen as if deciding her fate. The tension in the air was thick, the anticipation nearly suffocating. Then, slowly, she inhaled, held the breath for a beat, and let it out in a quiet exhale. A small, knowing smile curled at the edge of her lips. "No, officer," she said, her voice smooth, steady. "But I'd like her to publicly apologize." The crowd erupted in murmurs, whispers passing between them like a ripple in water. Some smirked, others raised their eyebrows in silent approval. Karen's face drained of color as the reality of Aaliyah's words set in. She wasn't getting arrested, but she was about to be humiliated. Karen's mouth opened and closed, her eyes darting from Aaliyah to the officer, then to the recording phones around her. The realization hit like a weight in her chest. This was already viral. Aaliyah raised an eyebrow. "I'm waiting." Karen swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. Her lips barely moved as she muttered, I'm sorry." Aaliyah crossed her arms. Louder. Karen's fists clenched at her sides, her entire body rigid with resistance. Her jaw tightened, her teeth grinding together. But she knew she had no choice. Taking a shaky breath, she forced the words through gritted teeth. "I'm sorry." The moment the words left her mouth, the parking lot erupted in applause. Some onlookers cheered, others laughed, shaking their heads at the poetic justice unfolding before them. The girl holding the phone grinned, shaking her head as she whispered, "Oh, this is gold." Karen stood frozen, her face burning with humiliation. She had walked into this confrontation expecting to assert her dominance. Instead, she had been publicly put in her place. The officer stepped back, his job here done. He eyed Karen one last time, his gaze cool, unwavering. She shifted uncomfortably under his stare, her earlier bravado long gone, replaced with stiff humiliation. Without another word, he turned to Aaliyah, his expression softening just slightly. "If they bother you again," he said firmly, "let me know." Aaliyah met his gaze and gave a small nod. She didn't need to say much. Everything had already played out in front of dozens of witnesses. There was no further action required. The damage had already been done, just not in the way Karen had intended. Karen and Tom turned sharply on their heels, their heads low, faces burning with shame. Karen's jaw was clenched so tight it looked painful, her fists trembling as she stomped away. Tom, for all his passive-aggressive remarks earlier, was silent now, his eyes glued to the pavement as if wishing he could disappear. As they hurried toward their car, the crowd around them burst into applause. A few people clapped sarcastically, others let out chuckles and whispers of satisfaction. A man near the back shook his head and muttered, "Well, that backfired." Karen flinched at the sound of laughter but didn't dare turn back. She threw herself into the passenger seat while Tom slid behind the wheel. Without hesitation, he started the engine, peeling out of the parking lot far faster than necessary, leaving behind the one thing they couldn't escape: humiliation. The parking lot buzzed with energy, the rush of justice having electrified the moment. Some people still had their phones up, making sure to capture Karen's retreat, ensuring the final chapter of this ordeal was documented. Others simply shook their heads in amusement, exchanging words about what had just unfolded. Aaliyah exhaled slowly, finally allowing herself to relax. She adjusted the strap of her bag, a small smile pulling at her lips. She didn't need revenge. This was enough. Karen and Tom had set out to belittle her, to remind her of some invisible boundary they thought she shouldn't cross. Instead, they had been publicly put in their place, their entitlement flipped into humiliation. She turned, ready to head toward the store, when a young woman holding her phone approached her, still grinning. "Oh, you are about to be famous," the woman said, shaking her head in disbelief. "This is already on TikTok." Aaliyah chuckled, a light, easy sound, the tension of the last few minutes finally dissipating. She glanced toward the parking lot exit where Karen and Tom had disappeared, then back at the woman. "Guess karma works fast," she said. With that, she turned and walked into the store, leaving justice to take care of the rest. The parking lot slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but the energy of the moment lingered. The lesson had been clear. Entitlement never wins, and racism has no place in today's world. Karen and Tom had walked in with arrogance, believing their privilege would let them dictate the rules. Instead, they had been forced to face the consequences of their actions, proving once again that karma always finds its way. Have you ever witnessed a moment where karma struck instantly? Tell us in the comments. Let's keep these conversations going and remind the world that justice doesn't wait. It happens when we stand up against injustice. If you believe in standing against discrimination, share this story. Every voice matters in the fight for equality, and together we can make sure moments like these serve as reminders that no one is above accountability. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more real-life stories that challenge, inspire, and bring truth to light. Until next time, stay strong, stay kind, and remember, karma never misses.